Well, good morning. Welcome to Westbridge Church. My name's Jeremiah. I'm one of the pastors here, and it's great to have you with us today. I want to say hello to everybody joining us online. Thanks for participating through that venue. And if you have small children you prefer to keep with you during the service, we've got great options in parent viewing rooms and lobby and cafe area and all that stuff. So love for you to participate through those venues. Thanks for joining us there. And then happy Mother's Day. So awesome to have so many moms here and celebrating you and honoring you. And today we're talking about parenting because that seems to be the theme running through today. So we've been in a series called The Road Less Stupid. The goal with that is that all through the scriptures there's wisdom, and the foundation for the whole thing. We all have we all have decisions we wish we could go back and undo. We all have seasons we wish we could relive. We all have things we wish we hadn't said. We have money we wish we hadn't spent, invitations we wish we hadn't accepted. And we can't go back and reverse time, but what we can do is use wisdom moving forward. And so throughout this series, we've been looking at different areas of our life where we can apply the wisdom that comes from God. And sort of the foundation for this whole series has been this verse that we find in Proverbs. And it says this: fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Wisdom really begins with an acknowledgement, God is God and I'm not. It's a very humble acknowledgement that says, okay, if there's an author of life, it's possible that his way of living life might be better than mine. And so that's where wisdom really begins, to acknowledge there's a better way of living. And so today we're looking at wisdom for parenting. Wisdom for parenting. I love the way that children are written about in the Psalms. It says this: children are a gift from the Lord. And we see that this morning as we're doing all these dedications. As you walk around this building, you'll see a lot of kids here at Westbridge Church because you guys keep making them, and it's amazing. And children are a gift from the Lord. They are a reward from him. Children born to a young man are like arrows in a warrior's hands. How joyful is the man whose quiver is full of them. That's awesome. I love that verse. And at the same time, I recognize sometimes you want to take one of those arrows and shoot them into the next county. And so, ultimately, children are seen as a gift from God. Now, just real quick, how many of you've been a parent for 5 years or less? Lift your hand nice and high. Okay, yeah, suckers. You got no idea what you're in for. All right. How many of you parents of teenagers? Currently parents of teenagers. Okay, yeah, your head is spinning. You've never understood your kids less than you do right now, right? How many of you empty nesters? Yeah, look at them. Look at how happy these people are, man. Just smiling ear to ear. It's unbelievable. For those of you that are parents of teenagers, I love this quote from Mark Twain. When a kid turns 12, you should keep them in a barrel and feed them through a knothole. Then when they turn 16, plug the knothole. So it's Mark Twain, all right, not me. I'm just telling you. Some of you are now grandparents. And you would say this, like your job when it comes to the grandkids is that you just fill them with sugar and send them home to mom and dad. And then others of you are in this category of boomerang parents, right? Like you sent the kids out, but surprise, they're back. And so wherever you find yourself on this sort of spectrum, we want to look at wisdom today. My wife and I have been married for 25 years. We'll celebrate our 25th anniversary coming up in a few weeks here. And we have 4 kids, 21, a daughter who's 21, married, out of the house. We've got a 17-year-old daughter who is graduating high school this year. We have a 15-year-old son who is going to take his driver's test next week. And then we have a 9-year-old son who is best friends with everyone he's ever met in his life. And so there's just this whole spectrum for us. And over the years, I've learned to change the tone of parenting. We've talked about parenting for a long time. It's one of those things that you got to come back to again and again. And when I have good news and bad news. The good news is I totally solved parenting 22 years ago. The bad news is my oldest kid is 21. So do the math on that. I was amazing at parenting before we had kids. I had all the answers. And I was a pastor, and so I just thought, we're going to do a talk on parenting. Here's 10 principles for raising amazing kids. And then we had a kid. And so the tone of those messages started to change. It was like, here's 7 suggestions for raising good kids. And then we had another kid, and it was like, here's 5 ideas that may or may not work. And by the time we had 4 kids, I was like, I don't know, here's 3 tips for survival, just hang in there. And there's enough dysfunction in any family to make us think that we're blowing it, right? But let me tell you something, you're not alone. Just look up any parent fail, compilation video on the internet, and you're like, all right, I'm doing okay. Like, they used to have a show called Nanny 911. You just watch that show, man. There's like 3-year-olds chain smoking, carrying handguns. I mean, it's like, you're like, okay, I'm doing pretty good. And part of the reason that it's so tough, that parenting can be so difficult, is it seems like we're constantly chasing our kids into the next season of life. It's like, all right, I finally got this infant thing figured out. Now they're a toddler. All right, now we got to figure this out. Then they're in preschool. We get that figured out. Now they're in elementary school. And we're always chasing them into the next season. And then by the time you have a second kid that comes along, you're like, okay, we've got this figured out. But then that kid's totally different than the first one. And you're like, oh man, they're not doing any of the same things that the other kid did. They've got different traits and different personalities and different talents and quirks and likes and dislikes. And you can raise all your kids the exact same way and they turn out totally different. I know it just from looking around my own dinner table. It's like, how in the world did this set of kids come from the same DNA pool? It's crazy. And it starts from birth, right? Like, some kids they just come out of the womb with a rose in their mouth. And they're like, I love the world. And other kids come out with a cigar in their mouth. They're like, hey, next few years is going to be tough on all of us. And they're just born that way, you know? And you add to that the complexities, all the complexities of the world that each new generation must face, right? Because now the culture that we live in is an ever-evolving ball of complexity that presents unfaced challenges for each new generation of parents. We're parenting in an age where we face things that no generation has seen before. And so all of these complexities, I want to help give us some wisdom when it comes to parenting. Now, let me give you a little background on me. I was a youth pastor for 10 years. So before we started Westbridge Church, I worked with junior high and high school students for 10 years, and I've had the privilege of leading Westbridge Church for the last 18 years. And so over the last 28 years of working full-time at churches, I can tell you, oftentimes as a pastor, people will come and go, hey, I need a little wisdom, I need a little guidance, can we meet, can we talk, I'd love some counsel. And churches are filled with smart people. You guys are smart people. And when you come to me and go, hey, I'd love a little wisdom here, it's not because you don't know the problem. You can identify the problem. You're just looking for a little bit of wisdom for a solution. And when people come and talk to me over the last 28 years and go, hey, I've got a problem and here's the problem, here's what I've never heard. I've never heard someone say this. The problem was, it all started when I didn't make the 8th grade soccer team. I've never heard that. 28 years, I've never heard that. I've never heard this. My problems began when I didn't get into the college of my choice. No one's ever said that. No one's ever said, the reason I'm struggling in my marriage is that my parents made me go to public school. Never heard that. I never heard this. The reason I didn't get along with my boss is that my dad made me drive a used car. My clothes were so outdated that my self-esteem just never recovered. I've never heard that. I had to miss my gymnastics meet. I've never heard that. We never had a big family vacation, never went to Disney World, never went on a cruise, never had a trip to Europe. I've never heard that. And I say that because in our culture today, there is this huge trap that we fall into with our kids. There's this pull of culture, and the pull of culture is to make our kids experience rich, relationship poor. Experience rich, relationship poor. And here's the result. I mean, it's just part of our culture. We don't even think too much about this. It's just natural. Our culture tells us, make sure they get on the soccer team, make sure they get on the baseball team, make sure they're on the dance team, right? And they get good grades, and they have nice clothes, and they have their schedules filled up, and everyone's staying busy, and they've got lots of extracurricular activities. And that's just part of our culture. And I don't think it's even intentional. We have the best of intentions with those things. We want our kids to experience some of the great things that we got to experience. Or maybe for some of us, we want our kids to experience some of the things we never got to experience. And so we end up consequently going, okay, I'm going to fill their calendar, I'm going to fill their schedule. And unintentionally, the pull of our culture is to make our kids experience rich, relationship poor. And yet, here's what we know as adults. In your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, it is your ability to develop and maintain healthy and meaningful relationships that makes life worth living. It's not about your experiences. Experiences are nice, they're wonderful, but in our culture, the temptation for you and me is to err on the side of experience rich. And consequently, and often unintentionally, our kids end up relationship poor. So everybody gets to the game on time, everybody gets to practice on time, everybody gets good grades, everybody's wearing nice clothes, everybody goes, on a nice vacation, gets good Christmas gifts, but we can't remember the last time we spent quality time together. Can't remember the last time I looked for 5 minutes and, eyeball to eyeball with one of my kids and just had a conversation. And isn't this true? This is just a byproduct of a culture that we're a part of and the priorities that we've set as a society. And we tend to measure our success as parents based on how well our kids do in sports, how well our kids do on the dance team, how well our kids do in school, their academics, their GPA. And rarely do we measure our parenting based on the depth and the maturity of the relationships that are in their life. And think about this, the issues that you might experience in marriage later on in life. Poor communication skills, lack of ability to manage your emotions, the fact that you withdraw or lash out during conflict. It has nothing to do with whether or not you were in gymnastics. It has nothing to do with the clothes you wore or whether or not you went to public school or whether or not you were a part of the baseball team or the fact that you can't get along with other people in the workplace, or the fact that you don't respect authority, or the fact that you're walking around with a chip on your shoulder has nothing to do with whether or not you went to Disney World in 9th grade. It has everything to do with relationships. And yet knowing that or seeing that doesn't stop our tendency to make our kids experience rich and relationship poor. So we're always on the go. And here's what happens. One day we have this wake-up call and we realize we haven't been investing relationally in our kids, and so we try to overcompensate or undercompensate. We'll try to they're experiencing consequences of some of their decisions, and we'll try to guard them against the consequences of their decisions, or we overcompensate and we start to lay down the law, set some restrictions, get these kids in line. And I don't mean to blow up your parenting techniques today, but can I just tell you something? Restrictions don't work. I'll just tell you, every once in a while you need them for short-term consequences to help kids understand some things, but no one has ever looked back at their life and said, man, I was heading down a path. And if I would have stayed on that path, that would have led to a dark place. But then my parents put in phone restrictions for 2 weeks, and wow, that just saved my life. See, the goal of parenting is not to protect our kids, it is to prepare them. The goal of parenting is not to protect our kids from life. The goal of parenting is to prepare them for life. Your home is the launching pad for the rest of their life. They get 18, maybe 19, 20 years with you, and then they get the rest of their life out there in the real world. So our job as parents is not to protect them from life, it is to prepare them for life. And here's what we know about our own lives. Our life is the sum of our experiences, the things that we've experienced growing up, the things that we experienced when we were kids, when we were teenagers, when we were young adults, even the things that you're experiencing now. If you said, what makes up my life? It's my experiences. It's the decisions that I've made, the decisions you've made, the decisions that I've made, and ultimately the relationships that I'm a part of. And here's what's so fascinating about that. You may have never thought about this before, but for the most part, you and I are the sum total of our experiences, our decisions, and our relationships. That makes up a huge chunk of who we are as people. Now, think about this for a second. Whatever experiences you had growing up were based in large part on your relationships. The family you were a part of that you didn't choose, the parents that you were born to that you didn't choose. A large part of the experiences that you had were because of the family that you grew up in. They were impacted by your relationships. And to a large extent, the decisions that you made were impacted by your key relationships. The parents that you had, the family that you grew up in, how you were raised, who you were with that night when you made that one decision, who you decided to go into partnership with, who you decided to go on that first date with, who you decided to accept that invitation from. All of these things, so consequently, our experiences and our decisions are largely impacted by our relationships. Your life, my life, is the sum of our experiences, decisions, and relationships. But it is your relationships more than anything else that have contributed to your experiences and to your decisions. And so think about this. When I was first credentialed as a reverend, and I got my license, my pastor's license, and nobody asked me what sports I played. Never came up in the interview. Nobody asked me what vacations I went on. Didn't come up in the interview. Nobody asked me what my high school GPA was. Maybe they should have asked me that, because too late now, suckers. But here's the deal. That means your key relationships in life have shaped you into the person that you are more than anything else. And here's the key relationships that have shaped you more than any other relationships. Your relationships with your parents. Whether you had a good relationship with your mom and dad, a negative relationship with your mom and dad, whether you had absent parents, whether you had, they were present physically but mentally absent, whatever your relationship with your parents, it has a huge impact on your experiences and your decisions. Your relationship or your lack of relationship with God, however you see God, it bleeds its way into everything that you do. It makes its way into your worldview and how you handle relationships and how you handle finances and how you do parenting, and whatever you view of God is, it makes its way into the decisions that you make in your life, the way that you experience life. And then your relationship with outside influences, right? There's outside influences that have influenced you in different ways. And so when you think about your life, these are the key relationships that have impacted your life by far more than anything else. Now imagine this. Imagine if there was a dial next to each one of these. Imagine if you could go back in your life, and if you could dial in or dial out the mix, the frequency, the volume of these key relationships during different seasons of your life. Imagine if you could go back and go like, man, there's that one season of life, and it's like, man, I need to dial my parents in a little bit more, because I know if I would have just listened to them a little bit more during that one season, I would have probably saved myself a big regret. Maybe dial in dad a little more, dial out mom. Maybe, dial in mom, dial out dad. Maybe just dial in my parents. Man, there's that one season of my life. If I would have just turned the volume up on God a little bit in my life, I know I could have avoided that mistake. I know I could have avoided that regret. I know I could have used more wisdom. Man, if I could have dialed out some of those influences that were telling me, no, just go ahead. Just make that purchase, make that decision, say yes to that invitation. If I could dial that out. And then there was I remember there was this one guy, man, he was such a good influence on my life, but I kind of ignored him. Man, if I could just dial him up a little bit, maybe just adjust the mix. Imagine if you could do that. Imagine if you could go back in your life and during different seasons, maybe when you're 12 years old, maybe when you're 15, maybe when you're 19, you go, man, I need to tune up parents a little bit, tune down some influences, tune up some other influences. You would all say, man, if we could do that, you could probably avoid some of your biggest regrets, and you could probably gain a lot of wisdom for your life. Now, here's the bad news. Can't do it. Here's the good news. For us as parents, for those of us who have kids, we have a unique opportunity and a responsibility to have our hands on those dials of these relationships in the lives of our kids. See, you can't control all the experiences that your kids have, and you can't control all the decisions that your kids make. But you can have a large amount of influence and sometimes even control on these dials and these key relationships in their life. This is so important for us. When you think about this, their life will be the sum of their experiences and their decisions and their relationships. And you can't control everything they experience, you can't control all their decisions, but you have a large amount of influence and sometimes even control over these key relationships. What if we could learn to be intentional about dialing in and turning up the frequency and the volume of our personal relationship with our kids? What if we were intentional about doing everything we can to enhance the relationship with God, and then very carefully tune in the mix in terms of who they're involved with outside of our home? I think it would be so powerful. You could have such incredible wisdom as your kids continue to grow. Now, here's why this series is so intensely practical. It's all about wisdom. It's all about going, okay, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, meaning God speaks into these categories in our lives and gives us incredible wisdom if we're willing to listen and apply them. So, over the next few minutes, we're just going to give you 3 simple ways to dial in, to think about, be aware of how I'm dialing in these 3 key relationships in the lives of my kids, in the lives of the kids that are in our home or that you might have influence on. So here's the first one. Parents, God gives us a lot of wisdom about these 3 relationships, and listen to the wisdom on how to tune in relationships with us as parents. This is the Apostle Paul writing to a group of people in Ephesus in the first century. He says this: parents, do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them. Rather, bring them up with the discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord. Don't exasperate them. Don't frustrate them. Don't provoke them. The Apostle Paul writes, we're never to frustrate or exasperate our kids because of how we treat them. We are to bring them up, which literally just means we are to nurture them. We are to nurture them. Don't parent your kids in such a way that you drive them away, but rather nurture them. This is a highly instructional, highly relational term. It means stay involved and stay in tune with them in such a way that you never lose influence in their life. Because here's what we know. We know that as our kids get older, it's the decisions that they make when they're 15 and 16 and 17 and 18 that carry the most weight and consequences in their life. So our role as parents is that we want to retain influence in the lives of our kids as they get older. When they're in their 20s, when they're in their 30s, I want my kids to come and go, hey, Dad, what do you think about this? Mom, what do you think about this? I'm thinking about this, but I'd love your input. Because we want to retain influence in the lives of our kids. Now, I want to walk through a chart. We've walked through this before, but it's so helpful to help us understand how to leverage authority. Because some of us as parents, we have authority, and we leverage our authority to get our kids to do what we want them to do. And we get momentary compliance, and we lose influence in the process. And we don't even realize it. Others of us, we just lean into influence before we really have influence, and we should be leveraging a little bit more authority. And so here's what this looks like for us. Let's walk through this. You've got 4 stages, 0 to 3, 3 to 12, 12 to 18, and 18 plus, right? And we've got these 2 things here, authority and friendship. And what you do is you lean into one or the other during the appropriate season of your kid's life. This will help your kids develop healthy relationships. Now, here's what this looks like. 0 to 3, you're the nurse. That's what this phase looks like. You're just trying to keep them alive. You're feeding them, changing them. Moms love this season. Dads are like, when is this thing going to talk? I can't connect with this thing, right? But here's what happens. 0 to 3 years old, there's very little authority, very little friendship. You are just a nurse. You are keeping them alive. You're feeding them. You're changing them. You're getting them through. There's not a lot going on in terms of authority. It's not like they can cognitively disobey or obey you for the most part. Friendship's pretty low. Then what happens is from 3 to 12, they're growing and they're learning, and this is the time where your authority should go way up. This is the season of life. Friendship goes up a little, but authority goes up a lot. Because this is the season of life where you, mom and dad, you're the king and you're the queen. Okay, you are establishing the rules of the kingdom. And the problem is, these little sinners keep trying to usurp the throne. They want to take over, okay? They're trying to usurp the throne. And so you've got to go, no, guys, let me establish boundaries. Let me establish consequences. Let me help you understand, these are the rules of the house. Now, I know some of you have done all the research in the world. You're like, but I read this. I've read 7 articles that say you should never tell a kid no. And listen, I respect that. You have the right to be wrong. Totally up to you. I'm just telling you, that's stupid. And here's why. Because what happens is parents who try to leverage friendship and early on, they're like, well, I just want to be friends with my kid. I don't want them to not like me. So here's what you do. You abdicate responsibility to the least mature people in the room. And it's because you want to be liked. And what you're doing is you're going, okay, this is more about me and my emotions in the short term than what is in the best interest of my kids in the long term. That is not a good parenting philosophy. I'm just telling you. I know all the research, but I also have seen what's going on in our culture. And I'm telling you, this is not about I'm dad and I said so. This is about helping kids understand. You make this decision, here's the consequence. You make this decision, here's the consequence. And then, by the time you're 12 to 18, okay, your authority should be going way down, and you should be leveraging friendship because you're moving into a coaching phase. This is less about you going, let me tell you what, by the time they're 12, 13 years old, a lot of what you're imparting to them has already been imparted. And now they're on the field of play, and you're the coach from the sidelines, and you're trying to help them, but you're letting them make decisions in real time, and you're letting them experience the consequences of their own decisions. And they make that decision. They experience the consequences. They come back to you and they're like, man, that didn't go well. And you're like, yeah, wouldn't do that again. But you're not leveraging it against them. You're teaching them. You're nurturing them. Paul says you're bringing them up with the instruction that comes from the Lord. And now you're leaning less into authority. I'm mom and I said so. I'm dad and I said so. And you're leaning into friendship. You're going, no, I'm the coach. Man, I'm cheering for you. Hey, it's me and you against this thing. It's me and you. We're facing this issue together. Me and you, we're tackling. I'm on your side. I'm coaching you. I'm behind you. And then you get to the point where they're 18 plus, and guess where your authority goes? Bye-bye. You have no authority. And so you're hoping that what you have retained is friendship. Because the weight of your influence is determined by the level of your friendship. And it's 18 plus where your kids are making the decisions that carry the most weight. That's where you want to have influence to begin with. Now, it is the quality of your friendship that determines the weight of your influence. So you've got to make the shift from authority in the early stages to friendship when they get later on. Now, here's what happens. When you reverse this, it does incredible damage to your influence. What happens is parents go, well, I went way too high with friendship here, and now that they're 12, 13, 14, and they're acting out, I better buckle down on authority. And you know what happens? You do exactly what Paul said not to do. Don't provoke your children by the way that you treat them. Don't exasperate them. Don't frustrate them, but rather nurture them, bring them up. And what ends up happening in that process is parents who buckle down on authority in the wrong season lose influence long term. So understanding this will help us as parents to utilize authority when needed, to lean into friendship when needed, and ultimately to retain influence in the lives of our kids, to dial in that relationship with our kids so that when they're 18, 19, 20, 30, 40, we retain influence in their lives. Here's another key relationship. It's the relationship with God. How do we dial in the relationship with God? Here's why this matters. Your kids will have a worldview. They will filter everything through that worldview. We have an opportunity to influence them now to make God a part of that worldview. And so what your kids think about God, how they view God, whether positively or negatively, it will impact everything about their life. It will impact the way that they do marriage, the way that they parent, the way that they view their resources, the way they view their talents, the way they view their time. And here's what Jesus would teach about wisdom. Jesus would say this. These are the words of Jesus. Anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise. This whole series, we're like, how do I become wise? Jesus says, you want to know how to be wise? Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The humility to say, there's a God and his way is better. He goes, so if you'll just listen to my teaching and then put it into practice, you will be wise. You're like a person who builds a house on solid rock. And though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against that house, it won't collapse because it is built on bedrock. And then Jesus contrasts that and he says this, but anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish. Like a person who builds a house on sand, and when the rains and floods come and the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. And Jesus says there are two kinds of foundations on which you can build your life. You can listen to the teachings of Jesus and go, man, there is wisdom there. God, your ways are probably better than my ways, so I'm going to put that into practice. And you'll become wise. And then Jesus says, you want to live foolishly? Listen to my ways and then ignore it. Say, God, thanks but no thanks. I got this. I can do this my own way. And this matter is immensely important because our kids will experience storms in their life. The storms will come. The question will become, what will the foundation of their life be built on when the storms of life come their way? And if their foundation is built on nothing more than, man, I was the captain of the football team in 11th grade. I was the head of the cheerleading squad when I was a senior. Man, I wore brand name clothes. I got good grades. I'm telling you, they're going to be at a loss. But if they understand there is a God who created me, who loves me, who wants my life to flourish, if there is the foundation of, okay, God, in humility, I recognize you're God and I'm not. Your ways are better than my ways. They will have a source of hope and strength in the midst of life's storms. So here's the big question. What are you doing to dial in their relationship with God? What are you doing? What could you be doing in advance to move their relationship with their Heavenly Father forward so that when they leave your home, they have a relationship with God, a faith that is built on something? Now, I would say this, a very, very critical first step. If you're like, I don't even know where to begin, start by continuing showing up as a family to church. You're like, okay, pastor. Of course you're going to say that. Of course, that's the preacher answer. That's the church answer. Can I tell you something? There is no better way to begin than to show up consistently around other people who are moving in the same direction spiritually. It's one of the best things that you can do for your family. Now, I've also heard this. I've heard this throughout the years over and over again, many different variations. Well, If my kids don't want to go to church, won't forcing them to go to church sort of turn them off to God? Can I tell you something? If your kids don't want to go to church, they're probably already turned off to God. And I don't think you can do any worse than to bring them. The idea that somehow forcing your kids to go to church when they live in your home is somehow going to detract from their faith, I think that argument doesn't hold water. Here's what detracts from their faith. When you drag them to church, but you don't live like Jesus the rest of the week. That detracts from their faith big time. And so here's a question you got to ask. What am I doing in front of my kids? How am I personally owning my own faith in front of my kids? And making sure that they see it in me. I love watching parents who bring their kids to volunteer with them. That will stick with them forever. It's awesome when parents make it a priority to get their kids here on Sundays, to get their teenagers here on Wednesday nights. Mom and dad, what are you doing to grow in your own spiritual journey so that you can show your kids what following Jesus looks like? I love when moms and dads follow Jesus' example of water baptism. That can sometimes be a humbling thing. You're going, hey, dunk me in water in front of a bunch of people. I've never looked better than when I'm soaking wet. But here's the truth. This is an act of humility that says, okay, God, you said to do it, I'm going to do it. And kids see that. They pick up on it. I love seeing that. I love when dads, one of the greatest things you can do is lead spiritually to help your family have a faith in God that's rooted in something. Be a part of a small group. I know that's tough for guys sometimes. They're like, what are we going to do? We're going to sit around and sing Kumbaya and burn incense and, finger tambourines or whatever. But I'm telling you, you're like, I don't know, I feel too messed up to go to a group. Bro, look around. All right, I'm just telling you, guys get this idea that church is for women and to be involved in something spiritual isn't very masculine. Like, well, can I still enjoy football? Can I still enjoy hanging with the fellas? Can I still enjoy complex carbohydrate beverages? Can I still rent Die Hard 7 when they eventually make it because you know they will? Yeah, guys, following Jesus, being a part of a church does not mean you have to check your nuggets at the door. All right, I'm telling you. We need men who understand the manly thing to do, the masculine thing to do is point their kids to their heavenly Father. We need women who don't just protect their kids from life, moms who don't protect their kids from life, but they prepare them for life. See, God wants to do a work in your kids. Are you working with him or are you working against him? What are you doing to dial that in the lives of your kids? Here's the third one, outside influences. What are you doing to tune in the mix of relationships of people outside of your home who are influencing your kids? Solomon would write this nearly 3,000 years ago, and it still stands up. Walk with the wise, become wise. You know this is true. You've been around some people who have influenced you in a positive way, and you're like, man, just from being around them, I've learned some stuff. This is also true. Associate with fools and get in trouble. You don't even have to be the fool. You were just there, and you were guilty by association because you associated with fools, and they lumped you all together. You're like, dude, I wasn't even the one doing that, and I got in trouble because I was there with them. That's because this is so true. You walk with the wise, you'll become wise. You associate with fools, you get in trouble. This is such amazing wisdom. We become like the people we allow to influence us. And guess what? The same thing is true of our kids. So here's the question. What are you doing to influence the people who have a relationship with your kids outside of the home? This is more than like, I got to keep him away from Johnny down the street because he's got a BB gun. That's not what I'm talking about. It's about asking this question. Not just am I dialing out some negative influences, but God, who are the people that I need to influence towards my kids? Who am I turning up in their life? What are their peers and other adults? When I was a youth pastor, so often parents would come to me and go, hey, can you just hang out with my teenager? Would you just go out to lunch with them? Would you go to their game? Would you just spend a little bit of time with them? Because I know I've been trying to say this as their mom and dad, but if you say it, I know they'll listen. And it's so true. Because I can't tell you how many times I've said something to one of my teenagers, and they're like, Dad, whatever. I'm like, I'm just telling you, I'm trying to give you wisdom here. And they're like, okay. And then they'll come home later that night, and they're like, my youth leader said this to me, and it was like, oh, so true. And I'm like, I just said that to you this morning. And they're like, but when they said it, it was like truer. For some reason. It just hit. It hits different, Dad. Can I tell you something? I love that. Because they're just like, oh, Dad, I got you. And I'm like, I got you. And here's the truth. I want that. I'm so thankful for the youth leaders and the kids leaders who have nurtured those seeds that we've planted as mom and dad that are reinforcing what we teach them at home. So how are we intentionally bringing other adults into the lives of our kids? Because he who walks with the wise will become wise, but he who associates with fools gets in trouble. I want to influence the other people outside of our home who are influencing my kids. So here's the deal. You got 3 dials. If you're a parent, you got 3 dials in the lives of your kids. The dial with you as mom and dad, you got their relationship with God, you got relationship with kids, influences outside the home. Here's the deal. Let me be clear. You are influencing these 3 areas. You might not be doing it intentionally, but you are influencing these 3 areas. Right now, you're doing this. You just might not be doing it on purpose. Maybe it's time to go, hey, you know what? I don't want these dials to just spin on their own. Maybe it's time as mom and dad to go, I want to be intentional about how I'm dialing in these key relationships in their life. You are influencing your kids in these areas already. It just might not be on purpose. One day the storms of life will come in the lives of your kids. And one day they will deal with real issues in this life. And let me tell you what nobody's going to say. I wish we would have just gone to Wisconsin Dells one more time. You know, I wish I would have just made the baseball team. I wish we could have just got a little bit, you know, if I would have just got what I asked for at Christmas in 1999, it would have changed everything. You're influencing your kids in these 3 areas. Will you be wise enough to be intentional about it? And would you be willing to begin to build your life on the foundation of following Jesus' ways? Because here's what Jesus says. It applies to our kids, but it applies to us. When we take the teachings of Jesus and we practice them, we put them into place. This isn't a place to just gain information. This is about application. It's not just what am I learning, but what am I doing with what I'm learning? That makes all the difference. And Jesus would say, the fool isn't the one who doesn't know anything about Jesus. The fool is the one who hears Jesus' teachings and decides to go their own way anyways. Wisdom would suggest, Jesus, I hear what you're saying, and I'm willing to put it into practice. And as we talk about families, the message of the scriptures is that God is building a family and he wants you in it. That God sent Jesus into our world to show us how much God loves us, to make us his sons and daughters. So Jesus came into this world, and in the ultimate expression of love, he allowed himself to be put to death. His body was laid in a tomb, and according to hundreds of eyewitness accounts, Jesus rose from the dead, which means there is more to this life than this life. And the message of Jesus is you're invited to be a part of his family. And you don't behave your way into that or church attend your way into that. It's an invitation that's extended to every one of us. And if you want to say yes to that invitation, I'd invite you to do that by saying yes to this prayer. God, please forgive me for my sins. Forgive me for the times I've walked away from you. I'm so grateful you never walk away from me. So I want to say yes to your invitation. Make me your son. Make me your daughter. And help me to put my trust in you and follow you and your way of living as best as I know how, gaining wisdom in that process. And God, for every one of us, moms, dads, aunts and uncles, parents, grandparents, those of us who have influence in the lives of kids, we are influencing them in these areas. So I pray, help us to do it on purpose. Help us to be intentional. Help us to dial in the relationship with parents, the relationship with outside influences, and particularly the relationship with you so that when the storms of life come, their life is built on a firm foundation. And God, may our collective family, the family of Jesus, as we put these things into practice, may we reflect the love and the grace of Jesus to those around us. We thank you. We pray this in your name. Amen.